Hello, everyone. Welcome and good evening, and a special welcome to a special TNT show. More details in a second. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thanks to you, the 131st TNT show we think, is a bit of an achievement. And India Live, we're growing and delivering more exciting shows. You can watch this TNT show, by the way, on indialive.net. It's streamed out on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, plus on YouTube. And you can view all the previous 130 shows on YouTube as well. Well, as I often say, if you're upset by media coverage of political events, or for that matter, in the case of tonight's show, economic events, where journalism is jumped in favour of stenography and or rehashed news releases, if you're looking for an alternative voice, well, you found it. We're here for you. Please be here for us. You'll see details of the crowdfunder on the screen shortly, and it would be fantastic if you could chuck a small contribution our way. Every little bit helps. Well, as I say every week, it's been another great day for British democracy, and the BBC, we learned that the SNP leader, Stephen Fry, had called out the Prime Minister for using misleading figures to justify legislation that will likely breach international law. The Prime Minister, it will come as no surprise to you, carried on regardless, because international law is not something that the UK government is terribly interested in upholding. Now, that's extremely dangerous, and we don't have time tonight to go into any of the ramifications, but ramifications there certainly are. And the last time extreme right-wing government decided to abandon any connection to international law, the consequences were extremely serious. But let's not go there, because we've got something much more interesting tonight, I think, in the immediate future. We'll be talking exclusively about an exciting festival of economics set for Dundee over the weekend starting Friday, March the 21st. Our guests are Kairin van Sweden, who's been on the show before, and of course William Thompson, who you all know. And they will be taking your questions live, so there's still time to get your question considered. And once you've heard the details, I suspect you'll be desperate to find out more. This is going to be a unique opportunity, folks. I mean, I know I'm pushing this quite hard, but the fact is there are some festivals, activities, areas which are worth pushing real hard. And I think you'll agree with me when you get to hear some of the details. So the TNT show, as you know, TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So in many respects, this is your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Take the chance to ask the questions. Well, welcome to William and Kairin. Thanks for joining us. How are you both? William, why don't you kick off by telling us what the festival is all about and why people should rush to get tickets right now?
Yep, I'm very well, John. Thanks so much for. I could learn loads from you on how to introduce a show. You're so much better than I am. Yeah, no, all's well here. Well, I know we're going to go into a lot of detail as much as we can, and we're really looking forward to having some questions about the event. But I've got a little video. It's just a 47-second video, but I think it gives a good flavour of the event. So I'll play that first, if that's all right, and I'll do that now.
Excellent. Well, if people don't rush out to buy a ticket right now, I have to question their judgment. But excellent, very good stuff. Kairin, assuming nobody's had actually seen that introductory video, how would you suggest? What would you say to people who might be swithering or perhaps undecided about finding their way to Dundee? Why should they rush out and buy a ticket right now for the 24th of March and the other 2 days the festival is on?
Well, as a previous resident of Dundee, I mean, I would really recommend a visit to Dundee anytime. It's a great city. There's a lot going on. The waterfront looks fabulous. We've got a new museum there. And yes, Scotonomics is coming at the end of March. And, you know, I think for anyone who's interested in Scottish independence and interested in economics, this is the event for you. You're going to hear some really interesting people that we've interviewed so far, and also people that we haven't interviewed so far. So, yeah, I think people who are interested in this type of thing, it will be great for them.
Before we get into the detail to a large extent, a couple of why Dundee? Why not Edinburgh or Glasgow? William?
Well, we're both Dundee graduates, aren't we, William?
Yeah, so that's a happy coincidence.
Yeah. So
it's a question of local prejudice, nothing more concrete than that.
Yeah. Well, for me, I studied economics for 1 year at university, and I dropped it because it was the way that the subject was being taught was what's called a kind of neoclassical approach to economics. So it didn't really make much sense to me at the time. It wasn't practical really, and it was based on a lot of assumptions which I really struggled with. And after a year, I remember, well, towards the end of the year, I handed in a paper, and it was a discussion on something called price elasticity. So why did prices go up and why do people still pay for them was the discussion. And I wrote the paper on drugs. And I was saying that these products were highly inelastic. And, you know, and this was a huge problem because in a lot of markets, you change the price and the demand it reduces. Whereas in Dundee, which has a significant problem with drugs, if you increase the price, it doesn't have any impact on the supply or on the demand for the product. And I remember being quite proud of it. And I remember handing it in my lecture. I said, this is just not the type of example we want to discuss. And I remember thinking, well, this is why I'm studying economics, because I want to know how to tackle these problems. I don't really want to do it by equations and in theory. And that was one of the reasons I thought just economics just isn't for me. And I think a lot of people still feel that about economics, that it doesn't really make much sense. And maybe if they understand some of the assumptions, a lot of the models don't involve money. They assume money's a commodity. You know, there's all these kind of peculiar things. They suppose everyone's really rational and individualistic and we don't follow trends. And there's all these kind of assumptions. And a lot of people think, well, that doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to do it. So now I've discovered another kind of school of economics, which is a heterodox approach to economics, which is much more practical based and much more based on reality. I've been able to look at economics and kind of get inspired by it again. So coming back to Dundee was kind of a way to say to me, look, there's another way of studying and learning about economics in the city that really put me off the subject. So it was a real kind of almost like a homecoming to me. But the final thing I'd say, John, is I went to Dundee a few weeks ago, and the people of Dundee and the people of Scotland need to understand economics much better so they can start voting for the right political parties and the right people in those political parties who are going to make a change. And when I was walking around Dundee and I visited the food bank at my university, which didn't have a food bank when I was there in the 90s, and I thought, we have to understand economics better so that we can change our economy. And I really felt like Dundee was a great place for us to start, because there's clearly problems in Dundee that were there the problems there now that weren't there when I was there, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect the problems in Dundee, do you believe they're much worse than, say, in Glasgow or Edinburgh or any other major conurbation when it comes to drugs?
I think Dundee has a very high rate in Dundee. And, anecdotally, I was there for 3 days and I saw 2 different lots of people taking drugs openly in the street. I've been in Barcelona for 10 years and I've never seen that. So yeah, I think the statistics will bear that out, and it's just an unfortunate outcome of the poverty in that city and the country in Scotland needs a government which is spending money in the right areas to help the citizens, and that's not happening at the moment. And a lot of people say that governments can't do that, and that's one of the myths that we are trying to kind of bust over the 3 days.
I take it you'll be tackling, Kairin, this old wives' tale, which I think was promulgated to some degree fairly successfully, sadly, by Margaret Thatcher, that the economy should be regarded much like a sort of domestic situation, i.e. you need to earn money in order to buy food, etc., etc. And you can't, as she would put it, and you can't spend money you haven't earned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the way that she managed to convince people about that fact has been really toxic for our society, and it's an idea that continues to be pushed forth by politicians of all persuasions, in fact. And it's really important that people understand what a currency is. That the government in the UK is the currency issuer. That's Westminster, the same as it is in New Zealand, that it is in most other independent countries. So, it can never run out of its own currency, and it can never be indebted in its own currency. And when you go back to first principles and realize that, then the next question is, so what's the limitations? Why can't the government just spend? Then you have to get into more complicated conversations. Well, there's the restrictions are real resources, and the creation of inflation, and those are the things that you need to be concerned about in a fiat currency world. So many people are still living in the gold standard world, and that's a world we don't exist in anymore.
I mean, I'd rather hope that some of these Thatcherite positions has been junked by now, but I can't disagree with you. Every time I turn on television, almost I hear some politician spouting the same lines and not contested or challenged, which suggests to me that the problem is much deeper than just in the field of politics. It extends to the media. I mean, it sounds to me like somebody needs to do a big time job on a lot of this stuff that goes on. But let's return to the festival, which is really positive, it seems to me. I mean, I've been reading the program. I mean, you're starting off on Friday, the 24th of March, and you'll be talking about innovation and the unique UK economy. What is the unique UK economy? Don't give the game away because you want people to pay for this on Friday, but just in broad terms, what is unique about the UK economy, would you say?
Well, hopefully, John, we're going to come up with 10 things that are unique about the UK economy, and we mean unique not in a good way, but unique in unfortunately a bad way. So we're going to kind of discuss, for example, the amount of privatization that's taken place in the UK compared to other countries. So I think it's too easy, and this happens a lot in Scotland, that we consider the economy and we look at England and we say, well, we're not privatizing as much as the English. Okay, and that's our kind of comparison, and we all know we do that too often in every kind of social and policy space. And what we're trying to say with the festival is, well, actually, let's not look at the English economy or the UK economy overall. Let's start looking at a broader range of economies, and let's look at the UK economy and say, what is it that we do in the UK that's so different from any other country? And privatization is a perfect example, and that we have privatized more than any nation on the planet. And a lot of people don't realize that. And when you don't realize it, you don't question it. So we're hopefully going to come up with 10 things that make the UK economy really unique and not in a good way. John, I just want to mention to Jock, he's got a question about quantitative easing. We're actually covering that in a lot of detail, and we thought long and hard about the title for that session, and probably slightly tongue-in-cheek, but our session is called An Easy Guide to Quantitative Easing, because I'm not really sure that there is an easy guide. But Jock, just one thing on that is that we're going to look at quantitative easing, and a large part of modern post-financial crash, quantitative easing is actually about an asset swap. It's not about giving the banks money. It's exchanging their bonds for cash to increase liquidity. And there's a lot of misunderstanding that the quantitative easing that was taking place basically from the 2010s was giving the bank lots of money. Well, it wasn't. It was exchanging assets. So we're going to kind of cover that because that was different from the type of quantitative easing that took place post-financial crisis when it was a bailout of the bank. So that's one area we're going to talk about is quantitative easing, and that's on this Saturday, I think.
That's excellent. And now, I mean, is this only for independent supporters, the festival?
No, absolutely. No, yes. Anyone who's interested in economics should come.
Yeah, really? and we've been really determined on that, John. And if you look at the programme, I've invited Labour Party politicians, I've invited trade union representatives, I've invited people who are completely non-political. There's people from Europe and global people who've got no kind of dog in the independence fight. And what we're hoping is that maybe we're being a little bit hopeful or even bloody minded, John, is that we hope that when we put all of this content in front of people, at the end of it, they'll say, I think we need to be independent, and I think we have to have our own currency as quick as possible to be able to do all these things that we're able to do. That's what we hope to do, but people might arrive at their own journey. But if you're an independent supporter, we're very welcome. If you're not an independent supporter, you're very welcome. And we hope that we can help people on this journey. Kairin and I are strong supporters of independence, but that's not really our overall focus for the programme.
Can I just add something to that, John?
Yeah.
And I just want to say that, the reason I started researching economics, and I thought I would find it dull. I don't find it dull, obviously. But the reason I started studying economics and trying to ask, okay, how does this country run? Was because people were pushing me forward to stand as a politician, as a councillor. And I thought, I really have to understand this before I go forward. Yeah. But then when I started to understand it, and then the global pandemic came, one of the things that was really disturbing me was this constant narrative, which was accepted that, we'll need to have more austerity post-pandemic. By this time, I really understood that really wasn't necessary, and really understood that people were voting, and we saw that with the landslide with an 80-seat majority for the Conservatives. People of the left were voting on the right because they believe that the Conservatives are more fiscally responsible. And what's actually the case is that they tend to do more deficit spending. So we really need to understand what we're voting for, whether you're in Scotland or England or anywhere else, and what the tools, the policy tools are that are available to your politicians, and what you should ask your politicians for.
Now, you've got a bunch of politicians coming to the festival, SNP, Alaba and others. You've got Alex Salmond on Friday, I see. And you've got Stuart Hosey is speaking at the festival, and a number of others. What do you think has attracted such a sort of broad view of this is something I want to participate in? And you've got people coming from all over the place as well. I mean, I'm not sure everyone fully understands how significant this event is going to be. I mean, doing something over 3 days is no mean achievement. I mean, anyone who's ever organized anything over 3 hours knows like doing something over 3 days is a big deal. And, it takes a lot of hard work and effort and all the rest of it. But the key is so much of it is about the quality of the speakers. Well, people will travel miles to listen to somebody who has something interesting to say.
Yeah. I think, some people who organize events, I think they go by that kind of axiom, we do things not because they're easy, but because we thought they would be easy. And that's what I think happens with events. People think, actually, it's not that difficult. And then you get into it and realize how incredibly complicated it is. Now, I did this for a profession for 20 years. So I know how complicated and difficult this is, but hopefully that allows me to be able to do it to a standard that looks more professional. And I think that we've attracted the speakers that we have because we've been constantly badgering them and sending them emails and asking them again and promising and really trying to get them across. And I think a lot of people have been with us on this journey that Kairin and I have been on through SCOTONOMICS for a year, and I think they do want to help us. And you know, of this, people of a kind of heterodox, which is not this kind of mainstream neoclassical view of economics, are so desperate to get their opinion out because they know how important it is for the public and for politicians to realize that there is a different way of running an economy, and there's a whole variety of different ways of running an economy. So people are really keen to come and speak to any audience that's willing to listen, and that's really all that we hope, is that people come to the event with a very open mind. And as we say in a lot of our promo, if you think the system's not working for you, then come and find out why and what you can do about it. And that's really what we want to do. John, I noticed there's a couple of questions which I can answer quickly and directly from the audience if you want there.
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah. Charles, thanks very much. Is this likely to evolve into an annual national event like a Davos for Scotland? Yeah. I know where you're coming from. I can't imagine Kairin and I would ever be involved in anything that's Davos. Like, I'm not sure. We'll see where we are after this year. We're only really going to do it if it's required. As I said, we're not making any profit from it. It's a huge amount of work, so it really has to be demand. To use an economic term, it really has to be demand led. Hashbury's got a question about a well-being economy. Yes, we have a panel session on the well-being economy, and interestingly, one of the panel members is from the Scottish Government, the chief economist from the Scottish Government. So he's really keen to sit on a panel talking about well-being, and that's also with someone from the We All Scotland, which is kind of a well-being alliance. So yeah, it's really important. That's on the Saturday, and we're actually looking at what a circular economy would look like, what a radical economy would look like, what a community-led economy would look, a kind of community well-being economy would look like, and also what a well-being economy would look like. So we're really delving in, and I think, John, if I could just say, the most important thing for me is that looking back at 2014, I think everyone was saying, could Scotland survive as an independent country? Could we manage our own economy? And what I think we've in a small part helped to do over the past 7 or 8 years now is to say we're beyond that now. We need to talk about what our economy looks like. Not can we manage it, but what does it look like? And that's really what we've tried to do. We're saying to people, the economy as part of society, as part of the United Kingdom, can be managed differently. And we need to talk about that. But also it can be managed differently under independence. So let's stop talking about can we, and let's talk about what that economy will actually look like. So I think that's a progression that the movement as a whole has managed to take over the last, I said 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I think that's it seems to be a very desirable, because if you look at the history of secessionist or independent or separatist movements across in historical terms, the ones that have succeeded have been assertive. I don't mean that in a sort of physical sense, but simply setting the pace so that the other side need to respond rather than sort of being constantly reactive to what the other group is doing. And it seems to me this is commendable. And you've also commendably avoided jargon. They'll have to ask, what is it when you say the festival has a community wealth building theme? What does that mean?
So I can maybe go into that. In response to your earlier question, though, I just wanted to also add something to what William said, which is that I think the climate crisis, the inequality crisis, is driving a curiosity about economics that is growing. I think people need to know, they know that they need to have the intellectual tools to fight these problems, these huge societal problems. And I think what also we want to teach them as well is not, what I'm frequently asked on the doorstep when I'm canvassing is, how can we afford to be independent? And what I want to turn people around to thinking is, it's not how we can afford, it's how do we resource Scotland when it becomes independent, because the currency is a tool. it's a policy tool, and it's how we resource things. So you're seeing at the moment that people are being rejected from the shores of Great Britain through policy from the Conservatives. On our statistics are showing that our population is declining in size in Scotland. It's growing in size in England. We would give our eye teeth for those people. So that's a policy right away that's going to change our economic environment in Scotland, so that we need a resource, which is people. We have lots of resources, which is energy, food, etc., water, loads of water. So getting people to really...
And is that what you mean by community wealth building?
And then the community wealth building, we've had a fascinating guest on with who talks about that, and it's really about keeping your money in your local economy as much as possible. So the Preston model has been really successful at creating jobs, about 140,000 of them in the north of England, simply by encouraging anchor institutions such as universities, schools, etc., to spend in the local economy as opposed to spending further afield.
Okay, and there's an obvious question. Why have you taken a festival approach rather than a sort of standard 3-day conference?
Yeah, well, that is a really good question, and I think being an event organizer for so long, I always tried to design events that I wanted to attend, not ones that I thought people had to attend. And without going into any kind of meeting design events jargon, I've tried to design learning events that were fun and were engaging and interactive. And I think all too often, and it'd be great to hear if this is people's experience, but all too often you go to an event like this and you've just got people talking to you and just telling you stuff. And we really wanted to design it so that we were able to have a forum where we felt like the audience were much more kind of participants than they were just the audience. And I think that's really helpful, able to do that when we mix in some comedy and some music. We've actually got, it's quite easy for Kairin and I to sit with an economist or a politician and speak to them about economics, but we've actually got a couple of comedians who are going to do that role for us. And we just think that that'll allow the audience to almost have a person on stage who's asking the type of questions. Because Kairin and I would never admit to not knowing something an economist says, right? But a comedian would be like, I've got no idea what that is. Tell us. And that's maybe what the audience want to hear. So we've got a little bit of music, a little bit of comedy, but it's really about creating an informal environment so that people feel like they can take part. We don't want an environment where people are just being told things. We want them to be able to question. So that's why I think people arriving with a feeling that they're attending a festival. All the venues have got alcohol there, so it's like a festival. It's not just a cup of tea. You can bring your drink in, you can engage, you can have fun, you can stay there for the whole day. There's book swapping. We're trying to create an environment where you would want to spend a few hours, not like a lot of events where you just rock up and you can't wait to leave.
Yeah, well, I think that's. I think you've. For me, that's a much more effective formula than the sort of let's all sit down and watch a series of speakers over a period of 3 days. It just doesn't. Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't work. I used to organise boardroom training for executives on business ethics. Now, there's a challenge. And the thing that was most effective was we surveyed them in advance, and people are usually interested in themselves. So when you feed back the results of the survey of what people said about themselves and their colleagues and about the corporation, everyone was absolutely riveted. It was the easiest thing in the world to move on from that to anything else you wanted to talk about, because you're actually feeding back to the individuals what they themselves thought were the issues. You didn't tell them the issues. You said, you told me these are the issues, and what do you think we should do about it? And bingo, you're away. You can just sit back. You've lit the blue touch paper, and people just take off after that. So I commend that approach. I think it's an excellent one. What should people look out for as the big events on the Saturday? We've talked about the Friday night.
Yeah, well, I think we've got some really interesting sessions, and I would highlight people towards two, really. The first one is the Scottish Central Stroke Reserve Bank. And that is going to be a fascinating session, because what we've got, it's split into two. It's an hour-long session, but it's split into two. The first half an hour, we've asked a constitutional lawyer from Australia and an economist from Barbados to say, you're on the, hey, congratulations, you're on the board to design a Scottish central bank. What should it look like? And we've basically got these two people, two fascinating and incredible women, to talk about how you would start a central bank from scratch, not how do you replicate what we've got at the moment. So we've got a half an hour, which I think will really kind of challenge the audience and the two people who are following afterwards. So we're going to say, this is what a central bank could be.
Okay.
Now, after that, we've got Tim Rideout and Stuart McIntosh, who've both written papers on what a Scottish central bank should be. And then they're going to talk about their perspective of this Scottish Central and Reserve Bank, but all in the context of what a central bank really could be, rather than just how does it tick the boxes currently. And I think that's not been done before. And again, I think that's just an example of how far we've moved in the discussion on a Scottish Central Reserve Bank. We're not talking about can we do it, we're saying we're going to do it. What's it look like? And we want to kind of widen that to really think about, well, actually, should a central bank have the amount of should it have the amount of responsibility that it does in a modern economy? So that's a fascinating session. That's right at the start of the day. And then we've got 45 minutes with Stuart Hosey, a conversation. So it's similar to the conversation that we're going to have with Alex Salmon on the Friday, but I think it'll be much more current, because we're going to speak about Alex and we want to really get into the detail of what the Scottish government did during the 2008 financial crisis. Why did he make the decision to try and go for a currency union in 2014? So it's a solid economics conversation with Alex on the Friday. And we want to have a similar conversation with Stuart on the Saturday, but really talking about his view of the fragility of the current UK economy and what can we do differently, and what are the barriers to Scotland acting differently at the moment. So I think those are two fascinating sessions. We're actually going to make the conversation with Stuart Hosey free, and we're going to stream that live to everyone. So we think that that'll be a really great way to kind of showcase the rest of the event. But there are actually a few free sessions that anyone can watch. There's that one on the Saturday, and then there's two on the Sunday. Cool. So that's one point I wanted to get across, John, is that you can pay to attend. You can come to the physical event in Dundee. You can pay to watch the event online, and we're really encouraging people to do that because we want as low a resource and carbon footprint as possible. And you can also watch a few of the sessions for free remotely as well. So we want to try and get this out as much as possible. We need to try and earn a little bit of money so we can pay people properly. We can pay for the venue, we can pay for all the promotion, but we want to try and get the messaging out as much as possible. So there's loads going on across the 3 days, but I would say those are the two highlights for the Saturday.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. And I take it because it's also online, there will be a recording of this. Will you be able to sell that recording afterwards? I mean, or are you making it available free, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, we're recording everything, so not just the sessions that are going out live. We're recording all 30 odd sessions, and we're going to be making them available to our patrons. So if you want to support us over a longer period of time, and you can do that from as little as £5 a month, you'll be able to access all of the sessions. But gradually over the year, we'll be releasing the edited sessions out as part of SCOTONOMICS and also on our episodes. So we know that our priority is getting people to see the content as much as possible. So we've got a little bit of a strategy to do that.
That's good. That sounds excellent. Excellent. And what are the highlights on Sunday, Kairin?
Well, I have to say, my highlight personally is we hopefully have a film or perhaps even in person. The former chairman of the supervisory board of the Icelandic Bank. I'm really inspired by the Nordic countries. I'm sure a lot of your watchers are. So that's particularly inspirational for me. Just thinking about a country that's really just over 300,000 people. And how they have their own central bank, their own currency, and how that works. And I think that's something that's a really big highlight for me. Also, probably Steve Keen. He's a very interesting speaker. I think our audience will be really fired up by Steve, because he's a pretty fiery character. And some of these people are new to me, so I don't know how they're going to be.
Sundays are kind of climate day, John, so we're going to be covering a lot about the climate crisis and the kind of economic underpinning of the climate crisis on the Sunday. So that's really the theme of the Sunday.
Do you have anyone from the Growth Commission coming along?
Oh,
there's no such thing as the Growth Commission. There's people who wrote the paper, but certainly we'll be asking Stuart Hosey and also Shona Robinson, who's speaking, and Kairin's chairing that session. We're going to speak to Shona about the. I think remind me, Kairin, what's the commission called?
Sorry, I'm going to bring it up. It's gone out of my head. So yes, well, the commission that she was involved in, it was really probably the polar opposite of the Sustainable Growth Commission.
It's the Social Justice and Fairness Commission, isn't it?
Fairness Commission. So that's probably the polar opposite of the Sustainable Growth Commission.
Yeah, so we'll be getting a flavour of that, but also it'll be really keen to see Stuart's view of that, because as we've been saying, constantly for the last year, it's still the document, and it's still the document that underpins the Scottish Government's approach to the economy.
Did you invite Andrew Wilson?
No. But he wouldn't have. I've spoken to Andrew. I've invited him a couple of times. He wouldn't have come. He wouldn't have come to discuss it. He said that he wrote it, and it's now for the Scottish Government or SNP to discuss it. So,
and is it still the official position of the Scottish Government?
No,
I think it is. I think it is.
No.
No one's came out. No one's come out and said that especially the fiscal rules of the Sustainable Growth Commission are no longer relevant. So it's unless someone comes out senior and says we're ditching the Sustainable Growth Commission, it's still the document that the Scottish Government are following, in my view.
But why do you disagree, Kairin?
Because the papers that they've published recently are a step change from that. But I think Kate Forbes in one of the hustings makes a really good point, and that is that it shouldn't be civil servants in the Scottish Government who are writing this. It should be the SNP, the actual party, that should be writing up their vision of an independent Scotland and how it will work. And the Green Party and the Alba Party should all do that. So when it comes to the time that we're getting ready for independence, and people can see what each party's vision of an independent Scotland will look like and how they will organise an independent Scotland. For example, how quickly do they think they can set up a central bank in their own currency? Where will they position all the different offices of state across the country? These kinds of things are the things that people need to know. What can we resource? What can't we resource? If we can't resource something, how are we going to resource that? These are the big questions that people need to know about how we're going to run an independent country going forward.
Isn't your biggest stumbling block? No, let me rephrase that. Isn't the biggest stumbling block? Obviously, the points you've just made in the subject matter is really interesting and exciting, and it's long overdue. But maybe the biggest stumbling block is psychological. It's not economic, really. In other words, the economics. There's a notion that says the economics isn't right because people's heads aren't right, i.e., that their value system is somewhere else. It's based upon not just the notions of the way the economy, the Thatcherite view of the economy, but much more particularly about a rather negative mentality about not being able to do things for oneself and looking to somebody else to provide for them. In other words, there's a degree of dependency culture still around the place, despite umpteen years, decades almost of devolved government. There's still that mentality. I mean, for example, if you look at other countries, you don't get that. Sorry?
Completely disagree with that. So, and the reason I would disagree with that is because you'll know that I was elected as a councillor in May last year, and we're chock-a-block with volunteers, people doing lots of things for their communities for nothing. There's a lot of people doing volunteering, and a lot of people, certainly in our civil service within local government in Aberdeen, there's some really progressive things going on. There are really progressive people there who are thinking in very progressive ways. So no, I would completely disagree with it. But I think the big hurdle for a lot of people is understanding how it will work.
I understand that, but you say that, but the practicality is, I mean, I lived in Kinross for umpteen. I was a community councillor for my sins, and what struck me was how hugely centralised the country is, extraordinarily centralised. And when you go and when you ask people a simple question, which is, why do we have the number of local authorities that we do? The answer comes back because a Secretary of State for Scotland was trying to reorganise things, and it was late at night and he couldn't be bothered sorting out. They gave him a number and he said, that's the number. And everybody was squeezed into the number. And I thought, that can't be true. That's a travesty. But the reality seems to be terribly close to that. And yet everyone went along with it. It just, and there have been so many opportunities since then to organise local government, for example. I just choose that at random. It's like, this is not rocket science. You're not messing around with the council tax necessarily. You're just saying, look, what we want to do is like they do in the States. We want to make you responsible for electing your local dog catcher or your local, I don't know, whatever. Because it's hugely disabling if you live in a local community to find out that you're powerless.
Yeah, I mean, both William and I are both big fans of subsidiarity. And, I would certainly like to see your community councils function much more like the council. I mean, if you look at the democracy.scot website, you'll see that, for example, in the area that I live in, we have one councillor for 4,500 people. If we were in Norway, we'd have one councillor for about 700 people. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the task. And I can tell you, John, that being a councillor is not a full-time job. It's much more than a full-time job. Really, most of the time it's 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. So, clearly we need more people busy with this type of work. And people in community councils should be empowered much more. That's absolutely my position, and I know it's William's position as well. But we are currency constrained. We get our dollop of currency from Westminster, and that's what we've got to work with. If we were less currency constrained, and also if we were less people constrained, if people were not moving to England because that's where all this.
I'm still not clear about why funding is the determining factor here. I mean, let me go back to Kinross just for a second. Kinross has 4 councillors versus 20 odd councillors for the rest of Perthshire, for example. The approaches are sometimes very different, but there's no sensitivity, in my experience, built into the system. It was based on majoritarian positions struck somewhere else, and my own personal experience was it was hugely. I'll give you an example of how odd I thought the whole process was as a community councillor. The community council in Kinross only had one power to speak of, and that was that it could require a planning application to be not to be dealt with by officials, but to be called in before the council. The Perth council took that away surreptitiously late on a December evening without informing the community councils. We became the only community councils in the whole of Scotland which didn't have that power anymore. And I didn't see the point of that. I thought, why would you want to take away the small iota of community control in a very important area? And why do it clandestinely? It struck me as bizarre. And there was no mechanism of going back through the system, to sort of address it. Oh, the deal was done, it's gone, you have to move on. I just thought that was so odd. But then after a while, I realized this is the way things are done. That the system is grossly over-centralized for a very small country. So I'd rather hope that if there's a possibility that somebody in the conference could take a look at that at the festival, because it seems to me if when you have behaviours like that, they are challenging and to some degree disabling, because they take away from the local people that sense of they have some power over their lives. You take my point? Or are things done very differently in Aberdeen?
Yeah, again, I would come back to resources, both monetary.
Why is that a resource problem? All you have to do is to say to people, you can have 10 councillors to look after your area. I mean, why is that a resource area?
For them, John.
Sorry?
You have to pay them money.
Well, you're paying for them already. They just happen to be in the wrong place. That's all I'm saying. That is a question of will rather than sort of economics, it seems to me, which I think is why the festival is so important, because unless you deal with these sort of environmental issues and attitudinal issues, it's like trying to fit something into a category that doesn't quite fit.
Well, John, if I could kind of address that kind of sideways, is that the classical neoclassical model on the economy wouldn't equate for any of these issues that you're raising. It wouldn't really. It doesn't. Neoclassical models don't really consider the behavioral aspect of individuals. So they just assume that someone acts in a particular way and it's rational and it's individual and it maximizes. Whereas what we are trying to say, and this is how we're actually starting the event, is to say that, economics is not the answer. And if you want economics to be the answer, then you have to make sure you're asking the right question.
Exactly.
But this idea that, after 3 days you would have all of the answers, even the economists have all the answers, is so far removed. We have to look at economics as part of this kind of toolkit of how you understand society. And all too often, and everyone's guilty of it, but we hear an economist saying something and we assume, quite rightly, that there's some kind of rationale behind that we should give it credit. And because they're an economist, that when they say something, it's likely to happen. Now, we know that is, we know from our own experience that that is not what the situation is. The economy is so complex and so difficult to predict that an economist's perception is maybe only slightly better than a random approach to what's going to happen. And governments believe they have got an element of control given to them by economists, and we follow what economists say, and our governments do that. And what we want to say over the 3 days is that actually, as a member of society and as a member of the public, you have to have a clearer understanding of where these predictions are coming from and how secure those predictions are. And that's what we want to give people, is that understanding that what's in a model, how does someone come up with this idea? And the idea that if I was to say to you, John, and on the 8th of March in 2030, there's going to be 15 inches of rain in Glasgow, right? You would say that I was absolutely crazy to make such a ridiculous prediction. Now, even if I say to you, but I'm a meteorologist, a meteorologist, I do this is my job, I've looked at trends, that's what I think is going to happen. You would say, no one can even possibly attempt to predict what the rainfall is going to be like in 7 or 8 years. It's madness. Right? And everyone would say that. However, if an economist says to you the unemployment level in an independent Scotland in 2030 is going to be 275,000 people, we are designed to be able to say, wow, that's terrible, we can't have independence. And we just want to get across to people that there's got to be some kind of barrier to our understanding, where we say to economists, that's interesting, but I'm not deciding my life on making a prediction like that. Just the idea that someone could predict a chaotic system to X amount. And we've seen it over the last couple of weeks with people saying the Scottish government will be £30 billion poorer off if we don't continue the extraction of oil and gas. Or if Scotland becomes independent, the unemployment level will be X. This is just absolute nonsense. And we have to get across to people that is the case. And we need to empower them to be able to say, and this is why. And that's really what we want to do. That's the real kind of one of the main features. So I hope that kind of in some way kind of answered this idea that it is about it is about what people think and how they act rather than just what economists say. And I've found a quote a lot of the viewers might actually know, but it's from John Robinson. And you need to understand economics so you can question economists. And that's really one of the kind of founding principles of SCOTONOMICS as a podcast, but also SCOTONOMICS Live.
It reminds me too of the old quote by Jim Callaghan, who wished for a one-armed economist, because every time he met his economic advisors, they would say to him, well, Prime Minister, on the one hand, it could be this way, and the other hand, it could work out that way. And after it was over, he was so confused. That was his constant plea. Could you send in a one-armed economist, please? And the other old quote, of course, which is probably relevant too, which is, we're all slaves to a long-dead economist. Because so much of what happens is based upon notions that were scribbled down a back of an envelope some 20 years, 30 years previously, you know. So if the festival takes place, I'm sure it will be a huge success. Do you have any plans on a follow-up? I know somebody said it'd be great to have a sort of Davos type thing, but leaving the influence of the big corporations aside, which I think you probably find unhelpful, there seems to be a kernel of a terrific idea there, that if the festival doesn't work, that perhaps if it was conducted on a periodic or a regular basis, annual or biannual perhaps, that might be something that people might find helpful and useful.
Yeah, we'd certainly consider it. I mean, it's based loosely on the Kilkenomics Festival in Kilkenny in Ireland, and that's been going for 10 years. Wow. So, you know, that's a big citywide event with huge, you know, a lot more speakers, a lot more sessions, a lot more venues. It's more expensive to attend one of their shows than it is to attend our whole day. So we're significantly cheaper than them. You know, they can charge up to 25 euros just for a 45-minute session. Our event's 20 quid for the whole day, and 20 quid to watch all the sessions online. So it's based on a really successful model, but you know, whether or not Kairin and I are the right people to do this and we have the time for it, we'll see. But I hope that, you know, we've got really good support so far. We've sold almost 80 tickets so far, with a couple of weeks to go. We're really happy with that. We've actually booked venues that can only hold about 70 people. So we would sell out at about 150. So we're kind of halfway to selling out. If we got close to that in our first year, that would be absolutely incredible. And going back to the community wealth building aspect, John, we're not taking any profit out of the event. If we do raise £1,000 or a couple of £1,000, we're donating that to community spaces in Dundee. So that's one of the things that we mean by, you know, the money that's raised in Dundee will stay in Dundee. And if we do this somewhere else, it'll be the same. If we do it again in Dundee, it'll be the same. We want these events to make a significant difference to people's learning, but we also want it to make as much of a difference as it can to the communities that are hosting us.
Have you had any interest from the candidates or the SNP leadership?
I have certainly asked Hamza to come along. I don't know if he'll be able to, but he does live in Dundee. But you know, they're pretty busy at the moment with the hustings. So and that will be literally just before the vote. So I think he'll be pretty busy then. So we'll see.
Well, they don't have to actually attend in person. They could send somebody along to underscore their interest in the subject. Because it seems to me that if I was going to be leading the SNP, and thank God for Scotland, I'm not. But if I were doing so, this is something I would like to get involved in and be interested in, because it's very rare that a body of information like this comes to your doorstep. Usually you have to go and seek it. And that's time consuming and sometimes very expensive.
Well, we'd be lucky, John, because, you know, having organised these conferences all across the world in my previous job, we've got a Scottish government that, you know, does take a lot of flack for being bloody minded and centralist. And, you know, that's justified, I'm sure, to an extent. but they're very happy to send across the chief economist to attend sessions as well as not. He's not just going to turn up, speak, and then disappear. He's planning to stay there for a period of day. We have the economic spokesperson at Westminster coming to speak. We have a senior MSP coming. So the engagement from the Scottish Government has been really, really good. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a Green minister. We approached the Greens to send someone along, and they weren't able to do it. But we have got really good engagement from the Scottish Government. So I think we can be really happy with that, because we are going to be really challenging. And the Saturday is about saying we've got these powers. What can we do with them? And how can we be in a situation where we get more of these powers? So we are going to be challenging to the Scottish Government representatives there. So I think that is really it's good kudos, I think, to the Scottish Government for that.
Well, we might be having some of the candidates on the show, and I could put that point to them. I can say, do you know what's happening in Dundee, and have you been involved or whatever? So,
well, actually, John, we've got 5 questions that we're going to ask all of our economists.
Excellent.
And hopefully we'll get their answers, and we'll put kind of like a reel together to see what they say. But these are questions that I think are fundamental, because they're questions that a lot of people would ask. I'll see if I can quickly find them before we disappear. But these would be really good questions if you wanted to ask a potential leader of the Scottish of the Scottish nation these 5 questions about the economy, because they really give a clear indication of, I think, your understanding of economics, but also your kind of direction of how you would want to see an economy go. So these are that's the type of thing we're going to have that for all of our guests.
I'd love to see that if you can dig it out. We're almost at an end. Invariably what happens in this hour, it just flies by. But are there any last thoughts? First of all, Kairin, from you, and then if you could follow up, William, any last thoughts you would like to leave the audience with that would incentivize them to rush up to and join you in Dundee over the 3 days?
Yeah, again, it's the Jones quote as well about understanding economists. So, Steve Keen is pursuing an economist called William Nordhaus, who published a paper stating that there would be no problem to the planet with 6 degrees of warming, because most people work inside. There will be no economy with 6 degrees of warming. So, please do not be intimidated by people who have the economist title. It doesn't make them gods.
Yeah. William?
Yeah, absolutely, completely. And that's a really, really good example. If we follow economists and this understanding of their kind of neoclassical view of the world, that the market will solve everything, that price will help drive down pollution, and that we can build and we can keep growing, then we will be facing a climate catastrophe. And hopefully, if you do attend the 3 days, either online or in person, you'll have a really clear understanding that there is an alternative to this neoclassical narrative, and there are alternatives. And if we don't go down this route, then we really are in huge, serious problems. There are solutions. There are people who understand how to run the economy in a way that's much more focused on well-being, a real consideration for the ecology and for society. And hopefully at the end of the 3 days, and if you stick with us over that longer period of time on SCOTONOMICS, then you'll have a really clear understanding of that.
Excellent, great summary. Thanks to you both. There you are, folks. You hear it right here and now that this is a hugely worthwhile festival. Take the time. If you can't actually go to Dundee in person, you can't travel the road on the miles to Dundee, perhaps you could join the conference, the festival online. And that would be something I think you might find helpful as well. In terms of our comments tonight, Charles Smith is saying this kind of event honours the evolution of economics started in Scotland by Adam Smith. And Rebecca McDougall said it's a great show tonight. So well done to you both. I hope the festival is a huge success. And as Julie Gagan said, I could listen to you all night.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie, and thanks very much, John.
A great pleasure. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
I'm saying a few words of in closing, if I may, and that is thanks to obviously to William and Kairin, and thanks to all of you for joining us. It was enlightening, educational, and informative, as we always hope to do. Look out for Graham McCormick next week, and also please look out for Elliot Bulmer's column in the Sunday National this weekend. You'll find it in the 7 Days supplement. And to all of you, thanks for joining us. Stay safe, take care. If you possibly can, go to the festival on the 24th of March through to the Sunday. And don't forget the crowdfunder. Thanks again. Good night, all.